Welcome to Kingdom of the Logos, a Christian program of critical thinking and adventure. I'm J. Dylan Proctor, and again with me today is Chris from the Generation Y Conservative.
Hi,
And
sorry about
oh,
that.
you're good. Yeah, we're doing this through Skype, so that's always fun.
Yeah,
Chris, go ahead and give yourself a plug on all the places that people can find you.
sure. Just a quick rundown on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You could just search for the Generation Y Conservative. I'm always posting articles about relevant things that are going on in politics, and you can search for me there and follow along with the podcast that I also have, which you can hear live on Facebook as we record it, or re-aired on Sundays on KLRN Internet Radio from 3 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And they've also put me onto iTunes as well.
Nice, nice. Well, let's move along in our conversation to talk about another recent event. I know in our last discussion, we talked about some things with a professor and we went into education. But now let's talk about Starbucks and boycotting and this whole situation in Philadelphia, where there's this claim that Starbucks had these two men arrested on racist conditions, but we really haven't seen the whole picture come into this. It's really one of these things where it looks like the culture has jumped the gun on this one and it's just gone full on chaos without really waiting for any hard evidence. What are your thoughts on all of this, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're talking about a city that's just an hour south of me right here in Pennsylvania, and it is making major news, and it's getting all over all over Facebook, in our news feed, because I have friends there in Philadelphia. I personally went to a college in Philadelphia. I love the city. Big Eagles fan, so big Super Bowl win there for the year. But I think this situation right now is actually pointing to a larger problem that we're having in culture, where any news story that comes out, it's commentated on and opined on before all the facts are in, which is exactly what's going on with this. And there was this firestorm with what happened to these two individuals at the Starbucks down there, and an immediate call for boycotting when the details hadn't all come out. So what we know so far here in Pennsylvania is that two black men walked into a Starbucks. They used the bathroom. They sat at the table. And eventually the cops came and ushered them out in handcuffs. And a video went viral of another patron that caught it on video of them being handcuffed and pulled out. After the fact, what we actually have now learned is that the manager, who's being called a racist, turns out to identify as a social justice warrior, which is someone who would also drive me insane. But she's now doesn't have a job. She's out of a job. She went over to their table originally and said, "Hey, is there anything I can get for you guys?" Instead of actually going up to the counter like the typical way, she went out of her way to go and approach these men and see if they actually wanted anything and if she could take their order. From there, they said no. They continued to hang around, not purchase any food, which is a typical Starbucks thing across the country. They bill it as a place to meet up and as your home away from home. But in this case, you're talking about Philadelphia here, okay, where there's a large population, and they're probably clogging up table space that could be potentially used for paying customers. Now, if this Starbucks actually had a racism problem in the past, being in Philadelphia, we would have heard about it by now, right? Instead, what we actually come to find out is we get the audio released of the 911 call, and she is on the phone saying, "Hi," very calmly, by the way. "I have two gentlemen in the restaurant right now who are refusing to leave or refusing to order anything. I would like an officer to come by and take care of the situation." Didn't say anything about characteristics of the guys at all. Didn't mention skin color. And the only thing that we can say right now that points towards racism is this patron's video, where the man that was coming to meet up with these two gentlemen came in, was upset at the situation of seeing the cops interacting with them, and said, "Are you doing this because they're black?" And that is where the whole issue lies right now, is it's based purely on this one guy getting upset at the situation and assuming right off the bat that this is because of racism, which is what we were talking about I don't know if this is on the podcast or not, but we were talking about the due process, which is innocent until proven guilty. This is now guilty until proven innocent. How is this store supposed to come up with the facts of that they are innocent, that they're not racist? That's like one of the most impossible things to prove, because you end up looking more and more like an enemy with every time that you open your mouth. Now, I don't know if you know the name of the CEO. He came out and apologized for the situation. I don't personally feel like he had to. It went up the chain and he addressed it. He apologized for it. I guess I do feel like he should have apologized, but no one's accepting it. And that's another problem that we're having in our culture today too, which is if someone apologizes for what they're doing or what their company is doing because this man can't babysit 8,000 franchise spots, then we should have the grace to accept that apology, I believe.
Oh, certainly.
It's gotten to that point where they don't want an apology. They want to hear an apology so they can shoot it down, continue to say what they're saying, and then shame that company into submission of some sort. Now, this company is shutting down 8,000 of its franchises for a cultural training day, and they are absolutely going to lose millions of dollars. And actually, one of my favorite comedians, Drew Lynch, said they knew exactly right where to hit the white people.
Oh, certainly. Well, so many things to build off to for that. I think I'm going to work backwards, though.
Sure.
Yeah, they're shutting down for this training, this implicit bias training, which, again, is something that not only is everything involved in this completely unprovable, they can't separate racism from in-group preference, which is totally different. The fact of in-group preference, when somebody has a family and, there's a tornado coming, you generally call your family first. This idea that you actually have connection to people, that's not racism. And not only that, in the places where they have this in-group preference, where they have this implicit bias training, there's no evidence that this actually makes the situations better. From everything I've read, most of the studies and even the people who created it recognize there's no positive results, but there's a chance that it actually makes people more divided in the workplace. It actually has negative side effects as opposed to positive ones. But working back just a few steps in this.
Is that because you're focused on the situation more and trying to avoid those confrontations?
I have no idea.
Real quick to go along with that, one thing that they did say in that training is to focus on training the unconscious, which I started cracking up at because now we're going to assume the unconscious of someone that they can't even tell what their bias is in the unconscious.
Right, that's the thing.
It's just so ridiculous.
And many of these problems we have in our culture really are separations of causes and effects. There's an effect that people don't like. And it's possibly even a perceived effect by their own definitions. It may not even be something which is actually there, but somebody subjectively perceived an effect. And therefore they are assuming that there is a certain cause which has caused that effect. And it's the argument itself is thin, the logic is thin, and the evidence is even thinner. So it's a terrible thing. But working back just a little bit in this, not only is that a problem with this whole situation, but there was an interview I seen with somebody that was there in the Philadelphia region, and I don't remember which news outlet was that was interviewing the man, that they had asked this man how he felt about the apology, and he said he was happy to see the CEO apologizing and not putting the blame on one person. Which, again, as to your further point that this really isn't what these people want, they like it so they can tear it around, this was immediately followed up by the fact that America is implicitly or explicitly racist. It's all these problems and we're never going to get past that. It always goes there. I'm not sure what these people have as an end goal because they're never happy with the apology. They say, that's good that he didn't put the blame on one person, but that's enough. But it's not enough, But I even see a problem with that logic because actually, if there is a person who commits racism, personal agency, if we believe that people are moral individuals with a personal will, then actually if there was an individual who was racist, then the CEO should have pointed out that that was a bad apple. And just this obfuscation.
If that was true, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things which also I thought was so peculiar in this, that they don't actually clearly come out and throw this one under the bus so immediately, which is sort of evidence that this may have not actually been racism.
Because there's no evidence.
Yeah. And as you follow the trail even a little bit further back, in the earlier information that was released on this, I had heard a lot about, even from the earlier days in this, that the manager, she had asked these people if they would buy anything, and eventually I think one of them asked if they could use the restroom, and she makes the statement that the restroom is for paying customers. I had heard a lot of reports on that. And I know even when before I was where I'm at now in life, I paid for grad school by being a realtor. And I know when I was over there, like, it was just understood. If you use the restroom and you use the facilities, we did a lot of business in Starbucks. Like, it was just understood that as common courtesy, you buy something if you're going to use their facilities. And it had nothing to do with what race or ethnicity we were. It was just that's how businesses operate. And I know even there, which we're in a much more rural place than Philadelphia, Starbucks was pretty filled up all the time.
Oh my gosh, yes.
They didn't really want people to be there for a super long period of time and just to be hanging out there without actually making money. That's an expense. It's a business. You're having that absence of income. So yeah, it's a problem.
Well, I think we may be conflating two issues as a society, which is you have company policy on one hand, which they're saying she followed company policy of saying that they have to be paying customers to sit there, versus the cultural understandings of what surrounds Starbucks as the employees are and their liberal leanings and everything. By and large, you probably can walk into your average Starbucks and lounge around for a while without being kicked out because you're not buying things. But if you have someone that's following company policy, you can't fault them for actually following through on that policy.
Right.
So,
with so many people in our day and age, they don't really care. They don't care about legal structure.
They're looking for something to be offended by.
Yeah, they just don't care. Anthony, you had something you wanted to add to all this?
Well, I feel like part of the reason why people are blaming her for enforcing policy and aren't really looking at it is, in fact, racism. Just the reverse racism. What I call benevolent, not benevolent racism. Where it's like, automatically they must be victims, And aside from that, back to what you guys were talking about earlier, I think it was called sensitivity training or whatever, the unbiased training.
Unconscious bias.
Yeah, that training, and how it may actually make conflicts within the workplace worse. I could see how that could happen very easily, actually, if I was working in a racially diverse place and one group of people were receiving, I guess, probably less aggressive treatment, and obviously probably less implicit aggression, because of course, which group of people and which group of people do you think is going to be the one that's blamed for racism?
Yeah.
In a diverse environment. In a diverse environment,
a lot of people
it's still going to be the
argue
same group.
Yeah. A lot of people will actually argue that white people are the only ones capable of being racist.
And that is racist in and of itself, to say, well, these other groups of people, because of their skin color, they are no longer capable of being, again, individuals, beings of will, beings of personal responsibility, which again, when you take a responsibility away, again, that cause and effect relationship, you want people to have the rewards of certain causes, but you're telling, or the effects with certain causes, but you're telling them they're not capable of having any sort of causal relationship with the world. They're all just subject to the environment around them. And I think that's so sad. And really, when I see something like the Starbucks, it does an injustice. And I don't have to qualify the word justice with social or anything else. It does an injustice to actual events that are racist.
Yes.
And I think all of us here would agree.
Yeah.
Show me cases of actual victims of racism. We will go and deal with that on those individual case-to-case basis. And especially
I think we have a responsibility to point out racism if it's coming from our own side as well.
Oh, yeah.
Because you look at the Charlottesville situation last year with the Antifa versus the neo-Nazis and everything. My word, I sat there and I thought not more than 98% of the nation right now is not identifying with either of these two groups, and yet everybody is being put into those two factions of you either support this one or this one. And to be honest with you, it was sickening that we were being classified as those two types of groups. Whereas I was seriously sitting there thinking to myself, at this point, they can all take each other out. I don't really want to go down that road of that kind of little war going on. But these people do not represent America, and if they do, I'm seriously missing something that's very concerning right now.
Yeah, and the gospel tells us that we're born again. It's not our fleshly circumstances who define we are, but it's our spiritual rebirth who gives us our identity in Christ. And I have a general rule that you treat people as individuals, and people would be surprised how much treating people as individuals instead of treating people as hypothetical circumstances from a group. They're just a manifestation of this group identity. It's just absurd that so many people in our world are reduced to operating on those terms. They look around and they say, "Oh, that's a white man over there," and just treat people as individuals, and the world seems to follow a much better path.
Absolutely. So the overall or the underlying issue of this, I think, is something that you found pretty interesting, which is in general what the thoughts are on boycotts, right?
Oh, yeah. Before we get too far along, back to boycotts. I know there are a lot of people who really struggle with this. They look at things like in the Parkland incident where we see places like Dick's. They say, we're not going to sell assault-style rifles, which, again, is a very loose term. People throw this around.
Yes.
And they beat up on the AR-15. I'm not going to get into that.
Yeah. I have a whole hour-long discussion if you want to look that one up on YouTube of the Second Amendment. So.
Oh, yeah. I myself, yeah. Not that I'm more of the Kalashnikov fan myself, the crudely stamped-out receiver. But anyways, all that aside. People don't understand the 5.56 round or the 223, but people come out and they're like, well, we got to boycott manufacturers, we got to boycott places, and a lot of people like David Hogg, they've been really successful in actually, well, let me qualify that. They've been successful in influencing the loudest voices in our culture, while I think they've been terribly unsuccessful with the masses of people. But you see things with what happened with Lauren Ingram, where they call up on Twitter, they say, everybody call these sponsors, have these people pull their sponsors. And you see some unfortunate success with that. But then for people who are on the other side of the spectrum, you get people who are more conservative, people who are Christians, and they look around at the world and they say, well, these businesses are supporting ideas I don't like. Should I boycott them and eradicate them from my life? How do I deal with this? Even people, when they look at Starbucks, again, Starbucks has been a very social justice friendly organization, but yet you see people who are that quick, the outrage mob turns on them almost instantly, and everybody's ready to
they're eating their
boycott. And my thoughts are, what are your take on boycotting? Is that a healthy thing? It seems to me like something which really moves our society towards chaos, but at the same time, the market forces of supply and demand, if people are selling a product, if a business is getting too far into the politics and the cultural side of things that they don't need to be. I like the idea of the market saying, hey, we don't like that. But then, on the other hand, I don't like it where there can be just one or two people. Take, for instance, someone like David Hogg, who has so much power, they send out a few tweets and they can ruin other people's lives. What are your general thoughts on boycotts?
I'm not for boycotts at all. I am for the free market principle, which is on a personal level, not a mob mentality of the boycott, which is, for instance, Target. We no longer shop at Target as a family because of their bathroom situation. And I know that rubs people the wrong way, but I have 3 daughters I have to be concerned about. They're at the age now where they can run into the bathroom by themselves. And I don't want a grown man that identifies as a man being in there and getting caught and falling back on the alternative of saying, oh, no, I identify as a woman. That's why I was in there, which has nothing to do with transgenders. If you're truly transgender, you're not going to know that person in there anyway. Okay. Yeah. Which is a whole other interesting conversation. But the fact is we are allowing spoken policies and that kind of thing. It just shut us off completely. We were done with Target, and Target has been seeing a dramatic reduction in their profitability over the last couple of years because of that decision. But on the other end, we have a mentality now where we are using the Twitter sphere and Facebook and everything else to publicly shame and bully a lot of people into actions to fit an agenda, right? Yeah. And you don't see it from the right. I would give examples of the right and left. But in the case of like Laura Ingram and everything, all she said was he whined. That was the extent of what she said about him. And he took the opportunity to then say that, to, in essence, bully her on Twitter by going after the companies. Now, from the company's perspective, which I think is actually the most important portion of this, a company is not supposed to be there to take sides on political, religious, or any other type of issue. They are there to sell to as many people as possible. The profit is the bottom line. And they have a responsibility to their stockholders and clients or customers to focus on as many people as they can possibly sell to. So if you see any companies that are falling to the victimhood of a boycott and they start pulling advertisements from a conservative network, they're now pissing off that portion of their base. Whereas the left portion of their base, in David Hogg's case with the boycott situation, I'm willing to bet the number of people that were actually boycotting and wouldn't use those companies really actually did speak up on Twitter, and the rest of the people don't really care. You know what I mean? So now the company is being targeted by both sides because they actually did take a negative action towards a conservative network. They should just stay out of the situation completely and cater to absolutely everyone, despite what the opinions are.
Yeah, that's the thing is my thing with businesses, and especially with the boycotts, I think the inconsistency in it is more dangerous than we give credit to, because it is so inconsistent how these things snap up so quickly, especially with Twitter and other things. The inconsistency of it is what kind of spooks me on the whole situation. But back to something you had said earlier, I think you made a really good distinction on there's a difference between mob mentality and then sort of the personal responsibility. And I think that's probably the best answer to boycotting is don't be a part of an outrage mob. Deal with your personal situation, have personal responsibility in your life, and when you come up with these moral decisions to make in your life, when you approach them, say, I'm going to do this as an individual, not because I'm embracing some outrage mob. And I think that's a good answer to that. Well,
there's plenty of alternatives out there. It's a free market.
Yeah, for real. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap this conversation up. Thanks again so much, Chris, for being with us. And I'll let you give a plug for yourself one more time here at the end.
Absolutely. I appreciate it again. You can find me on Facebook, the Generation Y Conservative, and on YouTube as well, where you can find the podcast and movie reviews and hopefully some other fun stuff coming up this summer. We have a couple ideas. But in the meantime, you can also interact with us on Twitter as well, at Gen Y Conservative without the E on the end, and find the audio podcast on both iTunes and KLRN Internet Radio from 3 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Sundays.
That sounds great. And for those of you who are in my audience, go and check out Chris. They have some really good content. And I didn't realize that y'all did movie reviews too. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I like doing movie reviews myself. It's really fun.
Oh, you'll have to pull me in sometime. I'm down for it. I love movies.
We do theology and things like Stephen King's It. Which just enrages everyone.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because the review I'm going to be doing right after this is for A Quiet Place.
Okay. Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, I talk about things and everybody gets mad at me. This like a church board member waiting with like papers to fire me outside the door. Anyways, not really. But thanks to everyone who's watching. Everybody go out there and check out Chris, subscribe and follow. And with that, we're going to wrap this up. Have a blessed day.